Okay. Welcome everyone here tonight. Wave your hand if you could hear me. Fantastic. Okay, so welcome everyone on a chilly New York evening. Well, not so much at home, for an evening of learning and education. We are joined today by a number of Chabad communities in the New York area. I would like to welcome Rabbi Zevi Baumgarten and the Chabad of Oceanside community. I would like to welcome Rabbi Asher Weisfish and the Chabad of Melville community. Rabbi Ari Kirschenbaum and the Chabad of Prospect Heights community. And last but not least, my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Mendel Teldin and the Chabad of Mid-Suffolk community. So Chabad rabbis all across the world are indeed involved in the hatch, match, and dispatch of Jewish life. We are there when a baby is born, throughout their Jewish education. We are there when one gets married. And of course, we are there when one passes away. And unfortunately, we take for granted, as many have questions when it comes to these fundamental areas of our Jewish tradition. We therefore are very excited to have Doron Kornbluth here with us tonight because it is through his research and education we know that he will have many answers to those important questions that all of us may have, particularly in the area of cremation or burial. Our speaker tonight has had the great merit to enlighten the Jewish world with his insight in each of these areas, with his best-selling books. Some of you may know them: Raising Kids to Love Being Jewish, Why Marry Jewish, and Cremation or Burial. It is through these books that Jewish families around the world, and it is through his speeches that they are more knowledgeable and more educated in such important matters of Jewish life. It was just last year, pre-COVID, where Doron has joined us all the way from Israel at our curriculum night here in New York City. And he talked about raising kids to love being Jewish. And he left the audience with a more meaningful and more educated way of how to be a Jewish parent. So we therefore are very excited to have Doron back, maybe not in person, but at least virtually, for another extraordinary talk. I did not introduce myself, so I'll take the opportunity now. My name is Rabbi Mendy Shanowitz, and I head, together with my wife, New York Hebrew, which is a network of Hebrew schools in the lower Manhattan community. The chat box will be open throughout the evening, and Doron will be able to answer those questions that you submit, and he will do so after his talk. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce to you, for the very first time right here, Doron Kornbluth, all the way from our holy land, the land of Israel.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I appreciate that. Hi, everybody. How are you? Nice to see you. Maybe we can just get a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly. All right, great. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here with you. It is indeed a little bit later here in the Holy Land. It's now just after 3 a.m. And I learned something recently. You know that famous line that people say that that dog is man's best friend? You heard that, that idea? It's actually not true. Coffee is man's best friend. So I'm doing great. I actually slept a few hours. I woke up, had some nice coffee. I'm doing great. I don't know if you guys are winding down from the evening, but feels like it's morning here in the Holy Land. It's nice to be with you. I appreciate you coming together, and for all the different Chabad centers around New York joining together to host this evening. I sometimes, when I speak of this story, speak of this subject, I think of a story. It's a story that I heard about this older Jewish gentleman sitting on his bed, and he calls over his wife of many years. He says, "Honey, come sit beside me on the bed, please." Kind of strange request. So she comes and sits beside him. He says, "Honey, do you remember when we were in our 20s and I broke my leg and you were there with me?" "Yes, honey, I was." "And do you remember when we were in our 40s and I went bankrupt and you were there for me?" "Yes, honey, I was." "And do you remember when we were in our 50s and I had my heart attack and you were there with me?" "Yes, honey, I was." So he says, "Honey, I have something important to tell you." And a tear rolls down her cheek and she leans in and he says, "Honey, you're bad luck." There are some subjects that just seem like they're bad luck. People don't want to talk about them. People don't want to deal with them. Death, cremation, burial is certainly on that list. It's amazing. In the modern world today, we talk openly about everything, money, sexuality, whatever. And yet, like, talk about death, burial, cremation, and it kind of like people don't want to talk about it. Don't want to hear about it. So that's why I want to thank you, all the participating Chabad centers, and all of you for joining, because it is important. You don't want to spend your life talking about this kind of stuff. You know, as far as we know, the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Tibetans were very death focused. They had a book of the dead. Modern society is not like that. We're not really into this so much. It's interesting. When a Jew has a drink, what do we say? L'chaim. We're into life, right? God will take care of the things that happen after. We want to live the best we can, you know, become better people, bring some holiness into the world. So we're into life. Anybody remember? It's just over 25 years ago when Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated here in Israel, and Bill Clinton was the president, and he gave a beautiful eulogy for Yitzhak Rabin. The last two words of the eulogy became a bumper sticker here in Israel: "Shalom Chaver," goodbye, my friend. But he said something in that eulogy that stuck with me. He said that in the Jewish prayer for the dead, now there really isn't the Jewish prayer for the dead. What do you think he was thinking of? Kaddish, right? The Kaddish prayer. He said in the Jewish prayer for the dead, we don't even mention death. And it's true. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei rabbah. May his name be elevated, be sanctified. So even we in Judaism, we don't want to over-focus on this kind of subject. But that being said, today, something is happening that requires us to talk about it, because things are changing and people are making decisions today without some basic information. So it is important to talk about. What's the big change? Well, the big change is that overall in the United States of America, the majority of people who die are being cremated today. About 3-4 years ago, it went from minority to a majority. It's over 50%, almost everywhere in the Western world, it's over 50, including the United States. And even amongst Jews, it's not as low as it used to be. When I was growing up, and it's been a few years, you can see from the gray hairs, but when I was growing up, it was 5%, 6% of Jews were cremated. It wasn't that long after the Holocaust, but now estimates of the Jews who die who are cremated, estimates are we're talking something like 1/3 nationally. It's certainly something like that. We don't know for sure. Rabbi Zone, who runs the Chaver Kadisha in Queens, did a study about 8-9 years ago, maybe no more, maybe 10 years ago, and he found that in Jewish funeral homes in New York, the requests for cremation are 25%, which means if you extrapolate to less quote unquote Jewish areas of the country and people who are not affiliated enough to go to a Jewish funeral home, it's even higher. So my question for you, and for this, it's wonderful. I love that Zoom is so interactive, and we have the chat. We'll open up the questions and comments, later, verbally. But right now, we can use the chat. I want you to tell me, why are people today, of all walks of life, all religions, all backgrounds, why are people today in 2020 choosing cremation more than ever before in our lifetimes? These may be things that you've thought about. It may be relatives of yours who said things. It may be things you've heard or things you've read. Put in the chat box. I don't know if you're on Zoom 10 hours a day and you know it like the back of your hand, or it's your first time. There should be, for me, on the bottom of the screen, there's a little thing, chat. You chat to everyone. And tell me what you think. Why are people today choosing cremation? I see people putting things, some great answers. Thank you very much for participating already. Alyssa said ecological. Fanny saying cost, excellence. Hai is saying seems more humane, interesting. Interesting. Maybe, I'm not sure what you mean by more humane. Maybe if you don't mind adding a detail or two, that would be great. I have a guess. Eco-friendly, David is saying. Alyssa, I think don't want to take up space. Very good. Environmental. So you're hitting all, the main ones. That's great. Good job, guys. I see it's not too late. You're on the ball. Leave more room for developers. I love it. That's a good way of saying space. Okay. So if you have any more, please feel free to keep using the chat. What we're going to do, let me just describe the structure of our short time together. I want to go through these reasons that you have chosen and analyze them. We're going to analyze the reasons that people choose cremation today. We are, Johnny is saying that you don't have to visit a cemetery, right? And it's mobility. You can, just take it with you when you go. Okay, excellent. You're hitting all the main ones. This is great. No, people don't, Howard says people don't want to visit cemeteries anymore. So all of this is, wow, you're doing my job for me. This is wonderful. No worms. Very good. Wow. Okay. So like this, we're going to analyze these reasons that you have very well articulated of why people today are choosing cremation. And we're going to find out together, some of them are valid and some of them are not. And I'm very transparent, I'm very open. Some of them are valid and make sense, and some of them do not. They're not based on truth. It's quote unquote fake news. Then we are going to flip the script, so to speak, and we're going to spend a little bit of time figuring out, why have Jews for thousands of years focused on burial? So that's the two parts of our short time together, analyzing why people today are doing cremation, which reasons make sense, which reasons don't. And then we are going to flip the script and talk about burial. Okay, in no particular order, many of you mentioned, and I hear this a lot, the idea that cremation, people choose cremation because it's better for the environment. This, by the way, is not a new idea. It goes back decades. And there are two main criticisms of modern burials. Environmental criticisms, and I'm an environmentalist at heart. I grew up this way and I teach it to my kids. It means a lot to me. So I take these seriously. The first one is the amount of land that is used. And the second one is what is put into the land in a burial. Let's deal with the first one first. The argument is a moral argument, and it is a strong one. The idea is, we have a limited amount of land. Let's just choose America as an example, but you can talk about anywhere. We have a limited amount of land in America. We have a population that is always growing. We are running out of space. So if you're a good person, why would you waste land on bodies that don't need it? Leave it for parks and trees and forests and kids and playgrounds. It's a strong point, because you and I both know that if there really was a question of either or, then it's that's not simple, right? So the only problem is that I ran the numbers. I'm not the only person to run the numbers. People did it before me, and people have checked since, but I did it quite thoroughly. And I got into this subject about 10 years ago. And the result was this book, self-plug over here, of Cremation or Burial, A Jewish View. It came out in 2012. Since then, I've been speaking a lot about this subject. As the rabbi mentioned, it's not my only topic, but I would say 20 or 25% of my requests today are for this topic. And I've spoken about it dozens, hundreds, probably hundreds of times. I used to be traveling around the world. Now it's on Zoom. And I've never been called out once on these numbers, not since the book came out in 2012, and not in my talks to thousands of people. And you can Google it and you can check. But get this one stat. I'm not going to belabor you with boring statistics all evening. That's not why I'm here. I want to share with you one statistic. If every American who died, and I'm only speaking to Jews who are less than 2% of the population, but if every American who died was to be buried, get this, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's landmass. That's how much land we have. 10,000 years to use up 1%. And we all know that very few cemeteries would survive those 10,000 years. And by the way, I'm only speaking to the Jewish Americans. I'm not even speaking to everybody else. In other words, there's plenty of land. We use far more land every year for new big box stores than we do for burials. If you doubt me, next time you can fly, remember when we used to fly? Next time you can fly, look down. There's a ton of land. It's everywhere. True, you want to be buried in downtown Manhattan, you've got a problem. But who says that the cemetery should be in downtown Manhattan? How often do you go to a cemetery anyway? Within 30 or 60 minutes of every metro area, there's plenty of land. This is true in North America. This is true in South America. This is true in Europe. This is true in Africa. This is true in Asia. This is true in Australia. There's only 3 places that this isn't true to my knowledge: Hong Kong, Singapore, and parts of Japan. By the way, there are solutions for each of those places. So the idea that we're running out of land and that we shouldn't waste land, environmentalists don't even talk about it. It's not real. The real environmental critique of modern American burial is not about the amount of land. There's plenty of land. There's no problem whatsoever. The real critique is what's going into the land. 2 main facets of this environmental critique of modern American burial. Number 1, metal caskets. You have to forge metal, make the metal, turn it into the casket, put it into the ground. It rusts over hundreds or thousands of years. Golden Gate Bridge after Golden Gate Bridge, everything. It's like ridiculous what it does to the ground. Number 2, embalming. For those who don't know, embalming means for people who want the body to decompose slower. It still decomposes, of course, but it decomposes slower. They remove the liquids, primarily the blood, from the body. They replace it with preservatives so that in traditions that have viewings, people want to see the dead body. Formaldehyde, by the way, was and still remains in many places the classic. It's a preservative. Gallons and gallons of toxic chemicals being put into the ground, burial after burial. It is horrible for the environment. We don't, let me say it like this. What do these 2 things have in common? Metal caskets and embalming. Anybody know? Rabbis, you're not allowed to answer. They're not Jewish. We don't do either. Judaism insists on simple wood caskets, pine, for instance, biodegradable. By the way, here in Israel, the body is carried in a casket, but when it's actually put into the ground, it's put into the ground in shrouds. And it's not put into the ground in a casket. Body is supposed to go back to the earth. In the States, what they do is they put 3 little holes on the bottom of those pine box so it'll connect to the ground, right? And so there's no problem of metal, and we don't allow embalming. It's considered a desecration of the body. By the way, if you have a bit of a masochist streak and you want to know why we don't allow embalming, just go on YouTube and watch an embalming. I suggest you don't, so you can sleep at night, but you'll understand exactly why we don't do it. So Jewish burials have always been known as models of environmentalism. Environmentalists are not in favor of cremation. Cremation uses a tremendous amount of fossil fuels. We're all switching our cars to hybrid or electric. getting away from the reliance on fossil fuels. And suddenly you're going to be firing up the oven all these times using fossil fuels. Furthermore, you'll Google it. Many municipalities have a rule that you're not allowed to put a crematorium right beside a school. Why is that? Because cremation releases toxic chemicals into the air. The worst one, by the way, it will not be around, will no longer be a problem in another 30, 40 years. And that's if you're my age or older. And if you have a filling in your teeth, you probably have mercury. And cremation releases mercury, toxic chemical into the air, very dangerous. They're not using mercury for fillings for younger people anymore. So that's whizzing, but there's other problems. In other words, burial is not a problem for the environment. Cremation is. And environmentalists are in favor of what's called green burial. Green burial's main two characteristics are no metal caskets, no embalming. There's obviously other ways that you could improve the design of a cemetery and et cetera, et cetera. So cremation is not better for the environment, it's actually worse. Next thing that you mentioned, I'm just looking at your list, and someone said, Joni said that, you don't have to visit the cemetery. Howard said younger generation doesn't visit the cemetery. So let me test your Jewish knowledge, okay? Your knowledge of Israel. My side job before COVID, at least, I aside from traveling around and going on speaking tours, 3-4 times a year, is that I'm a licensed tour guide here in Israel. If this ever ends and you come to Israel, you're welcome to be in touch and I'll take you around the country. But let's do a true or false, okay? Thumbs up is true, thumbs down is false. Question is, Doron's, that's me, Doron, Doron's favorite place to take tourists in Israel is the grave of Moses, the Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Thumbs up, it's true, it's my favorite place to take tourists. Thumbs down, it's false. I see Vogel saying false, Phil is saying false, Jay is saying false, Jonah is saying true, Howard is saying false. So it was a trick question, guys, I'm sorry. There's two ways you should have known that it's false, or you could have known, not should have known, you could have known that it's false. Number one, Moses never made it into Israel. Remember, end of the Bible, end of the Torah. He's in the east bank of the Jordan River, the current country of Jordan. Number two reason, it makes it very clear that we don't know where he's buried. God hid the place of his burial. He was such a great prophet that it could have become a place of idol worship. And so God hid it. Now, interestingly enough, 3,300 years ago, when Moses died, there was plenty of cremation in the world. Archaeological evidence is clear. And yet, God did not choose cremation. He chose burial, which is fascinating. Because we moderns, in our minds, we connect two ideas: visiting a grave and having a grave. And we think, well, if no one's going to visit the grave, then why bother having one? And if the kids are not traditional or don't care, or if you've retired down to Florida and like, who's going to visit me here? Everybody I know here is in a retirement home. They're going to die soon too. Anyway, like nobody's going to visit the grave. Where am I going to have it? I'm going to put the grave back in New York. I haven't lived there in 20 years. The grave's going to be in California where the grandkids are. I mean, how long are they going to? So we think if you're not going to have visitation, why bother having a grave? The example of Moses tells us that these two things are unrelated. If you like visiting graves, I actually do, by the way. I'm not some kind of a weirdo. I don't go every day, but it means something to me. You don't have to visit graves. So if you connect to it, wonderful. If not, okay. By the way, it's somewhat surprising how often someone in the family, one kid, one grandkid, gets connected to family, to history, to genealogy, to tradition, and wants there to be a grave. But the point is that even without, graves, bodies, and our souls deserve the grave, as we're going to learn, whether or not someone visits it. By the way, the mobility thing, the idea of taking it with me, there's a flip side. So let's say that I get the urn This is a coffee mug. It's not an urn. Don't worry. But let's say I get the urn, right? So, or just I have two urns. You know, God forbid my parents. You know, but you know, somebody has two urns, right? So then they move out of their home that they raise their kids in. They go into an apartment. There's not so much room. They pass the urns on to the next generation. How many urns does the next generation have? 4. Next generation, how many urns do they have? 8, 16, 32. You get my point? You and I both know that our lives and our homes are not destined for the long-term respectful keeping of cremated remains. It only solves a mobility problem for a very short amount of time. And it doesn't really solve it. It just makes it bigger because you're gathering them. So true, people may not visit the grave. I don't know, but there's nothing to do with having a grave, as we're going to learn. Another thing that you mentioned in the chat, that no worms. Who said that? Let me just see. I love how you said it, Keith, just straight. Some people are uncomfortable, what I call discomfort with decomposition. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into this subject. As Mendy, as you mentioned, this is not the only thing that I do. And to be honest, it's not really a subject that I was attracted to throughout my personal history. You can probably guess why. And I speak to parents and grandparents about raising kids that love being Jewish. I have a book called Why Be Jewish. I have a whole series of lectures on happiness and relationships. It's like a positive thing. I like being in positive stuff. And I was never into burial and cremation. And then in 2007, 2008, something like that, or 2009, I was on a speaking tour in Florida. And I open up a Jewish newspaper and I see an ad from a Jewish funeral home offering Jewish cremations. And I was in shock. I'm like a traditional Jewish boy from Montreal, Canada originally. And like, I didn't know there was such a thing as a Jewish cremation. Like there were just some things growing up that like all Jews did. Some Jews are more observant, some Jews are less observant, but there's certain things that everybody does. Growing up, we all knew that, Jews don't eat bacon, at least in public. Jews don't pitch World Series baseball on Yom Kippur. Jews don't pay retail. and Jews don't cremate. It was just like one of those things, right? So I was in shock and I started looking into the subject, and I spent about 3 years researching the subject and learned a lot. I mean, I got the blueprints for the electricity use of the ovens. I talked with funeral home directors. I read everything on the subject I could. The result was the book Cremation or Burial that I mentioned before, and these talks. And I want to share with you the biggest surprise I learned in my research roughly 10 years ago. The number one surprise to me personally, because I didn't know anything about the subject before, the number one surprise was that I had always assumed that cremation was like a microwave oven. You put the body in, you press the button, and 3 or 4 minutes later, it's done. Actually, ladies and gents, typical body, if you're thin, takes 60 to 90 minutes in the oven. If you're like me and you are suffering from what they call is the quarantine 15, you've heard about this? The 15 extra pounds that I've put on in the last 10 months. Oh my gosh. Give me some love, people. It's not just me, right? So we've all, if you're overweight, like many of us are, it's 2 to 3 hours. If you are one of the 25% of Americans that is technically obese, that's a BMI of 30 or above, then it's 3 to 4 hours. During that time, forgive me, I don't want to be too disgusting, but it is a talk on burial and cremation. During that time, 3 hours, whatever it is, the body is not placid and calm and spiritual. The muscles are extending and contracting. The brain is sizzling. It's a smelly, disgusting affair. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that burial is pleasant. I remember high school labs, okay? Decomposition is gross. I agree. But they're both kind of gross. The only difference is that burial is the natural way of every living thing. A plant grows, blossoms, goes back to the ground. An animal is born, runs around the forest, goes back to Mother Earth. Burial is natural. Cremation is a man-made, artificial, violent act. They're both kind of gross. Okay, next in the list of why people are doing it. Leaves more room, we talked about. Visiting graves, we talked about. No worms, right? Jewish cemeteries have been destroyed. Interesting, Jane. You know, there is a remark. I mean, aside from guiding in Israel before COVID, I also guide families and groups in Poland and Eastern Europe, and it's remarkable how many Jewish cemeteries there still are. I mean, it's actually fascinating. Even, you know, hundreds of years after there hasn't been a presence there, it's amazing. So I'm not sure if that's why people today are cremating. I hear, I don't know. Zalman is saying cremation is the hot new trend. That's pretty funny, actually. Do you mind if I use that? I hope so. Ladies and gents, as you go through the reasons why people are choosing cremation, and we just went through most of them, we can do more later if we missed anything. I don't think we did, but we can. It's fascinating that all of them are based on misinformation. They are not true, except one. There's one reason I did not yet address. What was that? Money. Meaning, it's not better for the environment. It doesn't solve mobility problems. They're both kind of gross, etc. You can go through everything. All these reasons that people quote are simply not true, except one. It is undeniable that in most cases, burial costs more. Now, by the way, it doesn't have to cost more. There are cremations that people do at a certain level that are very expensive. And as we've learned with COVID, that in many places you can't even have a funeral service, so that a burial is a graveside burial. There's ways of getting burial costs way down. So in theory, it doesn't have to be that way. But realistically speaking, for most people, burial is going to cost at least $8,000 to $10,000, and cremation is going to cost $2,000 or $3,000. There's at least a $5,000 difference for most people. Now, listen, if you're like me and you're kind of addicted to Starbucks, then I actually, there isn't Starbucks in Israel. We bring it in. I import it into this country, okay? So if you're addicted to Starbucks and you add it up, it's not that much more money in the long term. But the question is still going to be, why is it worth the extra money? And that's what I want to focus on now for a few minutes before we open it up for questions and comments. We've shown that the reasons that people choose cremation today are not true except for cost. Burial is usually more expensive. I would like to make a case now that it's worth the extra money. And I would say it like this. Gentlemen, when you proposed to your beloved and you gave her a ring, I certainly hope you did not get the ring from the bottom of a Cracker Jack box. Right? You actually spend some money on it, right? Certain things are worth the extra money, and I'm going to claim that this is one of them. So here we go. And let's say it. I want to list for you some of the reasons. There's too many. We don't have enough time to go through everything. But some of the reasons why Jews focus on, and always have focused on, burial. Number one, in World War II in the Kovno ghetto, there was a rabbi named Rabbi Ephraim Oshry. He actually survived the war and moved to the Lower East Side. And Rabbi Oshry told the following story. He said that one day he's in his little room in the ghetto, and a Nazi officer, blonde hair, blue eyes, SS uniform, barges in. Rabbi Oshry thinks it's his last moments on planet Earth. And the Nazi SS officer starts speaking to him in perfect Yiddish. Rabbi, I'm a Jew. I have fake papers. This is how I've survived the war so far. But I'm a very sick man. I only have a few weeks to live. And I know what they're going to do to me. They are going to bury me in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body, surrounded by Nazis forever. Rabbi, I've dressed this way. I faked it now to survive, but I can't be there forever. Am I allowed to be cremated to avoid the fate of being buried in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body forever? And the rabbi said to this young Jew, my dear child, no, you can't. And a Jew must do whatever they can to have proper burial. what they do to us against our will, there's nothing that we can do. But what we choose, we have to choose and do everything we can to be buried. In normal times, that means proper burial in a Jewish cemetery with everything that entails. But today, if you can just avoid cremation and be buried, it is better to be buried in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over your body than to choose cremation. This, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is not a guilt trip. I'm not into guilt, and I don't actually think Judaism is into guilt. I know it's surprising the way that we grew up, but if you happen to choose cremation for your relatives, or if your relative chose cremation, I'm not into like looking in the past and beating yourself up. You did what you thought was right, and they did what they thought was right. Over, move forward. Make a donation to the local Chabad in their memory. They didn't ask me to say that, guys, but they deserve it. But the point is, move forward. We're not into guilt, but it's a question of what the rabbi was teaching was that it's an amazing historical reality. Jews have always buried the dead. Roman historian Tacitus, when he described us to his compatriots, one of the few outstanding character traits was, we bury rather than burn the dead. If I was writing the Bible, if I was creating a religion, right, I don't think I would really care what happens to dead bodies. They're dead. But the Bible does, the Torah does. Abraham buys the cave in Hebron to bury Sarah. We mentioned Moses being buried at the end. The amount of ink that is given to burial in the tradition, in the Torah itself, is unbelievable. Abraham is buried, and Rachel is buried, and Jacob is buried. It's like a big deal. In fact, this is an actual mitzvah. It's not just a nice, cute thing. It's a commandment in our religion. You can look it up. One of the main source texts, not the only one, is Deuteronomy 21:22. An evil guy who was put up and was put to death by the court. And in Jewish law, the death penalty is a deterrent, right? The Talmud says that if a person is put to death once in 70 years, it's too much, right? But in the case where a person actually is put to death, they string him up and they have to bring him down, because that person, kavor tikbareno, should be buried. All the more so everybody else. First reason that I suggest it's worth the extra money, this is a core part of our tradition. Anybody here recognize the name Gilad Shalit? Yeah, I see people are nodding, right? I think he just got married last year or something. He was the poor soldier that was kidnapped by Hamas, and he was in a Gaza prison for 5 years. And Israel made a prisoner exchange. Over 2,000 terrorists traded to get him back. By the way, as much as we all wanted him back, that was a very controversial move here in Israel. Right? Over 10% of those 2,000 have already been rearrested for terrorist crimes. Right? It's not so simple. Famous. A little bit less well known is that, I don't know if you've heard this, the state of Israel has on several occasions traded hundreds of live terrorists to get back dead bodies, people we knew were dead, to give them proper Jewish burial. You can be for or against that, by the way. It's not so simple. But the fact is, we do it. The first reason that I encourage people to prioritize burial, this is core to who we are as Jews and our tradition. It's not a minor little point. Surprisingly important. Number two, let's move quickly so we have time for questions and comments. If you were to make two maps of the world, map number one, a map of monotheism, and map number two, a map of burial, you would find these two maps have a huge overlap. Just think about it. Countries where there is belief in no God, atheism, post-Christian Europe, whatever, or many gods, India, very high cremation rates. Places where there is belief in one God, the Islamic world, there is no cremation, doesn't exist, got it from us. Israel here today, there is almost no cremation. There's one crematorium in the state of Israel, and it basically serves the Russian non-Jewish population, although it's starting, trends affect here too. Even in the States, by the way, the Bible Belt has less cremation than the Eastern coasts, right? It's funny. There's this natural intuitive connection between belief in God and burial. There's a lot of literature on the subject as to why that is. I have a very simple theory. My theory is the Bible says, the Torah says at the very beginning that the human being, every human being, is created in the image of God. Now, God doesn't have an image. God is not physical. What it means is that our physical bodies somehow resemble the divine. They represent the divine. And you don't mess with that image. When you were 8 years old and your pet dog Spot died, I can virtually guarantee that your parents did not say, okay, honey, you bring the body over here, we'll fire up the barbecue. It didn't happen, right? What'd you do with Spot? You buried it, right? Get this, we bury things we love. We bury treasure. We burn the garbage. Isn't that amazing? Things that are important to us, we bury. What happens if, God forbid, there is a Torah scroll, a Sefer Torah, that is damaged beyond repair? You probably heard this. We bury it. Remember Hurricane Katrina? There were a bunch of shuls that were destroyed, flooded out, and the Torah scrolls. And there was a public burial. There's cemeteries that have places for Torah scrolls. We bury things that are important to us. That's the second reason. Monotheism, we connect to it, and it's important. It touches something important. Few other quick reasons. There's a lot to discuss, which we don't have time for. And I want to keep time for questions and comments, but I want to focus on a few more ideas that I think you'll find, helpful. So, well, let's say it like this. We mentioned the Torah scroll. So let's say, God forbid, rabbis, don't worry, this is only a hypothetical situation. God forbid, there is a fire in the shul, and you want to be a hero and save the Torah scrolls. Should you? Raise your thumbs up if you'd be a hero and save the Torah scrolls from the fire. Well, it's not so simple, right? And I'm glad you. So Howard's saying, you're absolutely right. If you can do it safely, huge mitzvah. Save the Torah scrolls. It's the holiest objects we have, right? And they're expensive too. It takes a long time for a scribe to write one. But if the firemen tell you that there's any reasonable danger to you, in Jewish law, you're not allowed to save the Torah scrolls. Doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, if you're a Jew or a non-Jew, if you're old or young, you're healthy, you're sick, you're observant, you're not observant. It doesn't matter. Each of us is holier than a Torah scroll. We bury a Torah scroll and we bury a person. A couple other ideas. Imagine the following scenario. The Shiva is over, and she gets up from Shiva of her husband of 50 years, takes off her black dress, and puts on her red party dress, and goes downtown clubbing looking for a new guy that very night. Sound normal to you? No, right? Because when you're a partner with someone, you don't just move on so quickly. Raise your hand if you have ever visited a Jewish monastery or a Jewish convent. Trick question, guys. There aren't any Jewish monasteries or convents. So I know you haven't visited them. Now, why aren't there? What, you think Catholics are stupid? You think that the Eastern mystics are stupid? They're not stupid. They're just as intelligent as anybody else. It's a philosophy. By the way, Catholicism and the Eastern religions are very different, but on this one point, they share the same philosophy. The philosophy is very simple, right? I don't mean simplistic, but I mean it's clear, right? They believe if you want to be spiritual, you want to go up, you want to get close to God, you have to deny the physical. The physical world is bad. They'll sleep on the hard floor. They won't eat good food. They don't engage in intimacy because it's either or. It's physical or spiritual. That's why there are monasteries. That's why there are convents. Spiritual people should stay away from the physical. What does Judaism believe about the physical? The exact opposite. On Shabbat, we have great food. You should have a beautiful physical life with your spouse. Well, God is good and made a good physical world. You have to treat it correctly. Don't be a hedonist. Rider on the horse, not horse on the rider. But the world is good. So doesn't it follow pretty clearly that if the body is bad, if the physical world is bad, just burn it, get rid of it. But if the body is good, whoa, cherish it. It's my partner. The soul and the body are partners. And here's where it gets a little bit deeper. We can talk more later if you want. Most important aspect in a sense. When a person dies, when the body leaves the world, the soul is still attached to its body. It is asking, it is begging for proper burial, because that is what it needs to move on. The soul and the body are partners. One final idea, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. I don't know where I got this from. I think it might be a real story, or it's just an idea. But I have this image, this vignette in my head of an older Jewish gentleman calls together his kids and says, "Kids, I have something to tell you. I may not have been the best Jew on the planet. Certain things I did, certain things I didn't do. To be honest, I didn't have a great Jewish education. Going back, maybe I do things differently, maybe not, I don't know. But there's one thing I do know. I'm a Jew, and I'm proud to be a Jew. And in my last statement on planet Earth, I want it to be, here lies a proud Jew. And I may not have been a perfect Jew, but I'm a proud Jew. And when I die, I want to be buried as Jews have been buried for thousands of years. I want the rabbi to say the prayers. I want a little bit of earth from the land of Israel to be put onto my grave. I want the Hebrew date there as well. I want the Hever Kadisha, the burial society, to do the proper cleansing preparation of the body. I want it all, because on my last statement on planet Earth, I want it to be, here lies a Jew, a proud Jew. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but that speaks to me somehow. I can respect that. I can connect to that. Let's summarize, and then we're going to open it up for questions and comments. We started out with the reality that this is an uncomfortable topic, but it's an important one, because people today are making decisions without the basics of proper information to make those decisions. We got into the reasons why people are choosing cremation today, people of all walks of life, and it turns out that they're actually not true. Mobility is not solved. The environment is not, all the reasons people choose cremation are not true. But there is one reason. In most cases, cremation is cheaper. And we then flipped the script and we said, okay, so why is burial worth the extra money? Now, the truth is, it's not a lot of extra money in the long-term scheme of things. I am a big fan of pre-planning and prepaying, right? Pre-planning is, you make the decision, you have it very clearly written. When my time comes, hopefully not for a long time, first person to call is the Chabad rabbi. Here's his name, here's his number, here's his Instagram. Make sure it's all done right, right? It's prepaid, it's pre-decided so that the kids don't, that when the time of grief can be a beautiful time of a family coming together, not a fight amongst the kids, right? It's all taken care of. But even if it is the extra money, why is it worth the extra money? There's a lot of reasons we don't have time to get into. I shared a few. This is a core part of our tradition, a surprisingly important part of Judaism. Monotheist people who connect to the belief in one God generally choose burial. That's always been the history, and it is even today. The idea that we bury treasure, we burn garbage. The idea that that we bury a Torah scroll, a damaged Torah scroll. We bury holy things, and I'm holier than a Torah scroll. The soul wants burial, needs burial, and the final idea that that my final statement on planet Earth, here lies a proud Jew. So that's some of the reasons why I encourage you to look into this issue, to think about this issue. I'm going to give you some resources to look at as well in the chat, but let's open it up for any questions or comments. Rabbi Ari, I think you're going to lead somehow, or how are we going to do this?
Hi, Doron. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Awesome. First of all, thank you very much. And thank you. It's a wonderful, enlightening talk. In fact, I'm going to go get a refund tomorrow and start looking for a plot. The truth is, I don't know if you touched it, you didn't mention it, but I'll just touch on it for a moment that I don't know the source of it, but it is brought down that if you buy a plot, particularly early in life, that it's a merit for long life.
Right.
I don't know where it comes from. Maybe you know where.
I think it's a Hasidic idea, as far as I know. I'm not sure that it's actually in the Talmud.
Got it. So again, thank you, Rabbi Shanowitz, and Rabbi Gurka, and Rabbi. I'm just going to go by Chabad. I don't know the names by heart. Melville and Oceanside. We're going to try to keep this tight to 15 minutes. And so what we'll do is, let me just turn the thing so I can see. If you'd like to ask a question, simply raise your hand and I'll unmute you. And this way you could address Doron directly. And this way we'll try to get around to as many as we can. I'll start with the fellow right here on my right. Jeff, you here? Go ahead.
No, I just have a question about the statistic or the fact that you brought up at the beginning about the 10,000 years, it taking 10,000 years to bury, all the Jews that will.
All the Americans, yeah.
Yeah, it just seems a bit misleading because we're not talking about the sum total of all the land in the United States, let's say, for instance. There's only a very small amount of land which is actually desirable. Nobody gets buried in the middle of nowhere. All cemeteries seem to be, that I've seen, in populated areas or where someone lives. There's a little house on the prairie, there's a little cemetery right near the house. So the actual land that's desirable is, let's say, the hot zone, is far smaller than the sum total of all the land. So it just seemed a bit misleading.
Okay, well, I appreciate the point. I actually don't think that it's misleading, because you're right that a New Yorker doesn't want to be buried in the middle of Wyoming. But that being said, next time you fly, when we're allowed to fly again, just look down. You don't have to go far from New York City to have empty land. I've spent a lot of time in New York. You're there now. There's a tremendous amount of land in New York State within an hour of the city. A tremendous amount of land everywhere. This is true in every metropolitan area. Within 1 hour of the city, there is a ton of empty land. By the way, there's people here in Israel that I don't know if you've been to Jerusalem, anybody here in the last number of years, but as you enter Jerusalem, there's a cemetery, the main cemetery of Jerusalem, and it's kind of built into the mountain. So there's actually different levels, and it's perfectly kosher, because it's all in the mountain, it's all connected to the ground, but it's kind of layered. And in Jewish law, there's no problem with it. It's in-ground burial. I have a problem with it because it gives the impression that there's a lack of land in this country. And if you've been to Israel, you might have noticed that in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv and the spread up to Haifa, there is a lack of land. But if you've gone outside those places, the entire Negev, where I live, I'm right now speaking from the Beit Shemesh area, half an hour from Jerusalem. The entire Galilee, the Golan, never mind Yehuda and Shomron. I mean, there's a ton of land. There's no problem of land.
But there's no cemeteries there because nobody wants to be buried there. So you can't take that into account in your.
Why does nobody want to be buried? Why does it matter? Why does it matter that I'm buried in a city or I'm buried half an hour outside of the city?
It's a psychological thing. I don't know why, but if you gave most people a choice, you can get buried near your hometown or near someplace important or special, like in Jerusalem, or you could be buried thousands of miles away where there's no one. And most people say, "Oh, what the hell? I'll get cremated."
But that's my point. And that's my point, is that you're bringing a false dichotomy. Excuse me. It's not thousands of miles away. It's half an hour away. It's 1 hour.
Even more to the point, nobody would want to be buried there. That's why there's no cemeteries there. Nobody wants to be buried there. If it was a good business model, someone would open a cemetery there, but nobody wants it. So I mean,
I just, respectfully, I just don't think that's true. People do not go to cemeteries that often, and there is plenty of land. The reason when I mentioned those stats, the claim that there isn't enough land, there is plenty of land. Within an hour of wherever you want to be buried, there's plenty of land.
It's a comfort thing. It's in people's head. It's comforting to feel you're near home. I'll be dead, but I'll be near Jerusalem. I'll be near my home.
I'll say like this. Okay, we always have to question a question of alternative. Okay, so I don't know if there's any if there's any koans on the call right now. A Cohen, if you're not one, I can try and make you one. I'm just kidding. A Cohen is only, if the father is a Cohen, the grandfather is a Cohen. So Cohens have this amazing rule that you may have heard, that Cohens are, because they're supposed to be in temple times, connected, especially connected to spiritual life, and they have the responsibilities in the temple, they have to stay away from death, right? By the way, this is the same rationale between separating milk and meat. You ever think about that? Why do we separate milk and meat, right? Milk represents life and meat represents death. It's a philosophy, okay? There's depth there. So Cohens stay away from death. They don't go into a cemetery, right? What about a Cohen and an urn? Can a Cohen touch cremated remains? And the answer is yes. No problem in Jewish law whatsoever. You know why? Because cremation burns the body at 1400 degrees Fahrenheit and it destroys the DNA. By the way, I've checked this with forensic experts. There's no DNA whatsoever left after a cremation. And that means that it's not the person. So that's why in Jewish law, right, just like in forensics, right, there's no problem with cremated remains. People ask me, what should you do? I have these cremated remains from my mother, from my grandfather. What should I do with them? So I say, for your psychological, you're talking psychology, I say, for your psychological comfort, just like dump them in a park nicely and say goodbye. But technically, you can do anything you want with them. It's not the person. Right?
Thank you, Doron. We're going to go on to the next question. David Sperling, go ahead.
Yes, Rabbi, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have a 92-year-old mother who says she doesn't care and she's willing to be cremated. I don't want her to be. Here's my question. If you, as I know, all Chabad rabbis believe that the soul is immortal, what is the effect of cremation? Does that destroy a person's soul and possibility of everlasting life, if that's what you believe in?
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, David. Just because of the implication of your question, I'm actually not a Chabad rabbi. As you notice, my beard is not long enough. I also can't drink, so I don't have the main qualifications. I'm just kidding. But I am very close to the wonderful Chabad movement. And I'll tell you like this. The first thing is, and you didn't ask this, but I get asked this a lot. So let me try and focus it. Sometimes when you're dealing with an older relative, logic and facts will not work. There's an emotional issue there. They've made a decision. Sometimes they just don't want to be a burden. They don't want you to spend the money, whatever it is, So I suggest, and I've put into the chat a number of resources. Aside from this talk, there's my email if we don't have a chance to answer questions. The main address for your questions, of course, should be your Chabad rabbi. But if there's something specific for me, I put my personal email there. My book, Cremation or Burial, where you can find it. It's also on Amazon, I believe. And then, of course, the main online resources, Chabad.org, for everything Jewish, including this subject. And there's one site that I put up with a friend called peacefulreturn.org. It's there listed in the chat, that has videos and top 10 lists and all kinds of like easy facts. So if the person, the older relative, in your case, the 92-year-old, or somebody else, if you can talk to them and if you can express some of these ideas, wonderful. If not, what I suggest is that you simply say, listen, Mom, we may disagree on this and that's fine. I respect you, you respect me. What I would just ask is that you do this for me, because it's really important to me. And even if you don't accept it, you don't understand it, I have never met a family where burial destroys the family. Never. It's just the norm in Jewish life. Cremation, oh boy, does that create problems in the family. Someone just never gets closure from it. So you didn't ask about that. You asked a much deeper question, but it was implicit in the beginning of your point. And to address that, the rabbis here are probably laughing to themselves or wondering why this guest speaker, this guy from Israel, did not mention the number one reason why our tradition insists on burial. There's knowing smiles going on right now. You realize that I actually didn't mention the number one reason why the Jewish tradition talks about burial. And that is what's called Tchias HaMesim. the resurrection of the dead. And the reason I didn't mention it is because it sounds strange to a lot of modern people. But let's focus on it for a minute because I believe it will answer your question, your very good question, David. Anybody here see, well, let me say it like this. I'm not proud of this, what I'm about to tell you, but I'll share it with you. When I think of the resurrection of the dead, you know what I intuitively think of? Just pops into my mind. Thriller, Thriller. Remember Michael Jackson, the first great music video in the 1970s? Zombies coming back out of the, I mean, like dead coming back to life. It sounds weird. It's a zombie movie. We believe that, and the answer is actually, yeah, we do, just not like the zombies. Certain beautiful ideas are beautiful and true, but we see them through the prism of Hollywood or some other religion, and it looks weird. So the idea is like this. If you've ever seen Jurassic Park, you probably noticed Jurassic Park is the idea that they find old DNA from millions of years ago, and they recreate the dinosaurs. By the way, this is more science than science fiction. We're getting there. Remember Dolly, the first sheep that was cloned? That's 40 years ago. Cloning today is extremely advanced. There are Hollywood celebrities today that their dog dies and they have taken the DNA and cloned their dog. They're walking around Hollywood, okay? It's not science fiction, it's science. The Talmud says that there is a bone, it's called the luz bone, L-U-Z is how it's usually written, that never is destroyed, and that the resurrection comes from that bone. So listen, you ask a forensics guy, he's going to say, I never saw a bone, I never. I think what it means personally is that it's still it's a bit of DNA. And from that DNA, life comes back. Voltaire once said, it is no more of a miracle to be born twice than born once. Fascinating line, actually. Right? The idea being like this. The physical world is important. We established that. Remember the Torah scroll, the body, right? No convents or monasteries, right? The physical world has a place in the world to come. And if they do it to us, victims of the Holocaust, then of course, God is good and God will fix it. But for a Jew to decide to deny, to work against the resurrection, to make the physical, to imply that the physical body is not important, that's a real problem. You know, people often ask me, well, how do you know what a soul wants? How do you know after death? Like, well, you've been there? Thank God, no. But I would say like this, like many of you, I have kids. I have 5 teenagers. Give me some love, guys. It ain't easy. So I also have one older kid. My oldest is 23. He's the commander in the Army. We as parents, we don't just like give birth to a kid and like let him figure out life. You actually teach him or her about life, right? I mean, that's part of parenting, giving the kid the instructions of what's important, how to live, how to make a living, what you're here for, how to form relationships, how to respect. I mean, you teach your child what they need to know. You give them guidance. Well, God is a good parent, and he gave us certain indications. He didn't just leave us randomly as if we don't know anything. And we do have traditions that teach us things. And one of the traditions that we are taught, and this is the answer to your question, long-winded, their own answer to your excellent question. The soul needs proper burial to move on to the next stage. It craves it. It needs it. During the Shiva, the soul goes back and forth between the body and the Shiva house to hear what's being said about it. Until the 30 days, the Shloshim, it is still very connected to its place. And it always has a connection to that place. And the soul needs it. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that great question.
Thank you, Doron. Anybody else? Jay, I'm going to ask to unmute. Just click on your computer to unmute yourself. There you go. Go ahead.
If the soul leaves the body after 1 year, so why do we go visit this? I know there's an answer, and I think you just said it, but why do people keep going back if that's the body's there and the person is up in heaven?
Jay, it's a great question. It's a very deep question, actually, and I encourage you to follow up you're interested in this, with your local Chabad rabbi on this. I'll give you the short answer. Okay, it's only a short answer. You ever been in a party and like somebody walks into the room and the energy in the room changes? Like we all feel it. Certain people have certain energy, right?
Yeah.
Some people are intense, some people are relaxed, some people are argumentative, whatever it's going to be. Like we can feel a person's energy. By the way, every person has energy that they give off. Just sometimes there's so many people around, there's so many distractions, you can't feel it, right? That energy does not disappear fully with death. The physical and the spiritual are not disconnected. Remember, this goes back to the point that we talked about before, that there's certain traditions that see that that the physical world is bad. And if you want to be spiritual and go up, you have to deny the physical. We say, we believe, we know that the physical world and the spiritual world are very connected. The whole point of life is to bring spirituality into this world, which means that soul never fully leaves that body. It slowly goes more and more upstairs, so to speak. I'm giving a very simple parable of a very deep concept, but it is always connected to that place. And the energy of that person is still there. That's why people go to graves to pray. You're not supposed to pray to the dead person. We only pray to God. But there's something of the energy there, right? The grave of Rachel in Bethlehem, the grave in Hebron of the matriarchs and the patriarchs, the grave of the Rebbe, the oil, right? The person is still connected to their place because the spirituality of that person affected the physicality of where they are. And so there's an energy I can tap into. Does that open up a little window for you?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It does.
Thank you very much, Jay. Does anybody else want to chime in? Doron has got to go to sleep soon. It's 4
I don't know
o'clock.
if I'll be able to go to sleep. I'm fully caffeinated and adrenaline is going, and what's going to happen now? I don't know.
Seeking Minion at the Kotel.
There you go.
Anybody else?
Okay, everybody. Let me share.
Howard. Oh no. Okay, fine. Go ahead, Doron.
Let me share, Rabbi, if I can share one final idea, which I think is very touching, for me. A comedian once said, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying." So, we all feel this connection to the future, to the eternity. We, like someone once said, tell me about your kids. How old are they? And and the other woman said, well, the doctor is 5 and the lawyer is 3. There's something we connect to the future. We want a legacy. What Judaism says is actually very beautiful. And the idea is that, yes, Joni, it was a Woody Allen joke. You got it. Okay. What Judaism actually says is very beautiful in my humble opinion. And that is that we're part of something. People today often look at life as if it's a snapshot. What's happening now? What's happening now? What Judaism teaches is that it's not a snapshot, it's a video, it's a movie, and I'm born into the middle, and I'm leaving in the middle. And everything that I receive people built it before, and I have to leave, and we're connected to each other. And just as we are connected in life, community, look, you came together to Zoom, even after 10 months of Zoom, you're probably sick of it already, right? We're communities in life. In death also, we're a community. And that's why Jews are buried in a Jewish cemetery. One of the most spiritual, I remember I told you the story that I was never into this subject until I started researching. And I went to my first tahara, the cleansing, the preparation of the body. I did it. It was actually in New York 10 years ago. And this will sound a little weird, but we've been together for an hour, so hopefully you trust me a little bit. It was one of the most beautiful spiritual experiences of my life. And I'll be very honest, it was so touching. A baby is born, the doctor nurse wash it, wrap it, prepare it, and bring it to the mother. A person dies, and the community members wash it, prepare it, and bring it to the next stage. It is an amazing, beautiful, holy experience. They say psalms, they say Tehillim. So what I would leave you with is this idea that we don't understand all of this stuff. I don't understand everything. Maybe rabbis, you do. But we do have a sense that this is important. And this is why Jews have focused on it for thousands of years. when a new Jewish community is formed, what is it supposed to do? The first priorities that are quoted that it's supposed to do: build a school, a Jewish school for the next generation, build a mikvah, a ritual bath, and chevra kadisha, proper burial of the dead. It is that important. So we talked about all the practical, functional, financial, all the sociological stuff, but at a deep level, the real reason is, I think, for me, I'm a Jew, and I want to be remembered as a Jew. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much, everybody. In this chat, if you look, I have put my personal email, so if I was not able to answer your question, please email me. There's a lot more about it, if you permit the plug, a lot more about it in my book, Cremation or Burial. You can go to Chabad.org, the source online for Jewish knowledge and everything. Right? If you're not there every day, you should be, right? CHABAD, Chabad.org. It's got a ton on this subject. And then the other site that I put up there in the chat is Peaceful Return, which has videos and has top 10 lists and things like that. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Doron. Have a good Shabbos and a good Shabbos to everybody. Thank you all for participating. Thank you to the organizers who put this wonderful thing together. And Amir Hashem, we'll do it again next time on Life. L'chaim for life, everybody. Good job.
Thank you so much, Doron.
Thank you.
Oh, Mendy, also you want to just, all right. You still there, Mendy?
I am.
I said you could say you if you recorded this, you can share the link with anybody who requests it if they want to,
Yes, this was recorded, and I'll share it with the Chabad rabbis on the chat. Like this, you could share it with the communities.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mendy. Good Shabbos.
Surely, good Shabbos.
Very interesting.
Everybody.